It's a time that we get to study again the return to the Exodus story. The Haggadah is very different than the Passover story written within this chapter. There are actually several Passover stories within the Passover story. So what I wanted to begin was just returning now. We're in Exodus chapter 12 in either the Liber Chumash, the Eitz Chaim, or the Green Chumashim. So we're respectively page 363 or page 380. And so what I wanted to set up for a moment, we're going to be reading actually the first maybe 30 verses before it returns to the narrative. Because the Haggadah is about a story. It was so interesting just on Wednesday night. We had panelists speaking about anti-Semitism and some of the difficulties of being a young college student on campus. And what it kept returning to was stories, these individual stories, the individual challenges, while talking about the alphabet soup of college life and some of the political challenges of some of the movements, BDS and other organizations that some are supportive, some are critical of both Israel and Judaism.
That was just awesome night.
It was a really powerful evening, but what I wanted to say was I think why it was awesome, and in reflection of your own Passover Seders, is it had both a kind of macro experience of trying to lay out the groundwork for those that were unfamiliar, but the narrative, the Haggadah, that personal sharing from both the student and then a young kind of post-student, and then from the two directors of Hillel and Jewish Life, that combination,
You were there.
you really were there. And I think this is what our Torah does as we turn now to this story, which is, I believe in the historical kind of editorial process that has woven together a historical story with a redactor that's trying to reset kind of the calendar of the Jewish people, and take two major themes. What I hope to get to today is show you how Pesach, which was the lamb itself, was the centerpiece of the ritual for the family, and matzot, which was at the Exodus time of the biblical period, less important, that in the retelling of the story, the matzot becomes the essential, and Pesach moves from a noun, meaning the paschal lamb, to a verb, to pass over, which is the irony that many of you have asked me and mentioned, why aren't we eating lamb tonight? Why aren't we eating lamb tonight? And we could talk about that. There are many reasons why we don't eat lamb, but why matzah is so important, and that's where I want to end. Why matzah has taken the kind of premier place within the Exodus as a narrative marker. So let's return now to chapter 12, and what it's so powerful when it says, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. What do you think, if you're a writer, for those that are writers, what is that first line really telling you? Trying to get you, to situate you, to set this chapter in a narrative context.
I'm struck by the first and last words.
Vayomer.
Right, but it's there twice. And not in the English translation.
Okay.
So it's a real telling.
Well, so there, lemor is saying, and God spoke to Moses, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, saying, what does it mean that this is both a dictate and the gerund of saying? This is an ongoing process. I will tell you this day, telling you. I told you, I'm telling you. We're continually saying this. And so therefore it's in context, but it's also out of context. Because just know, right before this is the 10th plague. Yeah, we studied this together. Just one page before, all you have said, you shall die. You have spoken rightly. I have not seen your face again. This is Moses and Pharaoh really having a head-to-head in dialogue. Chapter 12, it's a different tone. And so when God spoke, but it is a direct dictate. It is to the Moses and Aaron, the leaders of this time. At this point, it doesn't say to the priesthood, or as we'll say further, what we say to our children. HaChodesh hazeh lechem. This month, we're now chapter 12, verse 2. HaChodesh hazeh lechem rosh chodeshem. Rishonu lechem lechodshei hashana. This is the month that will be your new first month for you of all of the months. What could that mean?
It's the beginning.
Yes.
New beginning.
Of course. Take it in context of living in a foreign land.
You'll be at odds with the culture.
Correct. This month is your first of the month.
This month is your first of the
As opposed to
whatever
Their calendar.
their calendar, which was true in Egypt. Aviv, actually, Aviv means spring. Chodesh Aviv is we're about to have. But what in Babylon was the first of the year, in Babylonian context. Tishrei. Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, is a Babylonian start of the year. Yom Kippur, we say Rosh Hashanah with the shofar is our first of the year. Kind of not. Chodesh HaAviv, this is the first of the month. This beginning of the spring.
What was the first month on the Egyptian calendar?
So that's...
It was this one or a different one?
So that's they don't want to say it. They don't want to say what their practice was. And well, there are two questions. One is that there's no, because the Nile's up and back, that they don't mark beginning, but they do have seasons. But I believe that it was back in the fall with the flood season and the beginning of how do we prepare for the flood season. So this is a marker to demarcate you from Egyptians, from Babylonians, because in the historical process, if this is a later interpretation, they're already in Babel. They're already in Ezra and Babylonian. But let's just say for us here, this is how we mark our new year. The spring rites already like spring is in the third quarter. How do you tell your children, Christmas, don't worry about it? New Year's, I mean, my kids know this about me. They just think I'm a miser, but I don't do New Year's. We just watch movies. I don't stay up. I'm like Pyrrhic victory. But it is in some ways kind of a separation for me and this is where I celebrate this new year.
Don't all calendars from the beginning base their yearly cycle on agriculture?
So, no. Many do. I would say the French, when they tried to have the French Revolution and they made right, and they changed each and every name. I think that's exactly their implicit response here. Certainly this has to do with the spring. Aviv means the budding ears of barley.
So the French do what? I don't understand.
The French changed from a Gregorian calendar that was based on the church, so the Cult of Reason tried to have a 10-month, a 10-year. You don't remember this? They changed the entire calendar to rip you away from the cycle of the saints and the cycle of Christmas and the cycle of that becoming the new year. The state did.
When did they do that? In
1789.
Okay.
But it didn't work.
Clearly.
Just as here they're saying, Rishonu lachem lechodshei hashana. This is the first of your years. They are trying very much to say, this is how you operate your calendar. Which for me, like Durkheim's famous law, if they're trying so hard to tell you what you're doing, something else is going on. Dibru el kol adat Yisrael lemor. So now you're getting this parallel structure again. What is the difference between Vayomer and daber. One is this speech, parol, which also means commandment. Dibru, aseret hadibrot, is also a dictate, command. But the first one is Moses and Aaron from God. And this is, now verse 3, speak to the whole community of Israel. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael. This is a very subtle narrative shift. What's the shift?
Well, the Ray isn't words. It has to do with specific
command
words
them.
as opposed to
Aseret hadibrot,
right.
specific. And now it's moving from Moses and Aaron to, hey, this is what we do. It's not telling you the priests, because I don't think this is in the time of the priesthood. It's not in the time of the rabbis. This wasn't a time of the rabbis. It's just what we do. Back to your challenge last question, and I struggle with this now, because I've only, remember, disclaimer, calling a 20-second timeout for those listening to us. I've never done KI, a ritual calendar. So when we are closed for Passover, just that point, okay, that's what we do. Because Dibru el B'nai Yisrael, this is what we mean. Right now I'm struggling and I'm doubling down on this because Shavuot, I'm thinking about a Shavuot program. This is a major pilgrimage festival. By the way, Shavuot also used to be 7 days. Because if you're going to go to Hawaii, you don't go for 2 days. You know what I mean? So Shavuot used to also be a 7-day festival. Trying to get a program? Well, sorry, the show's closed on Shavuot because it's a holiday. And the irony is palpable.
Well, it's strange.
And yet, I can make the positive argument, I want you to be home. Now, a lot of synagogues aren't doing Friday night services because they want people to encourage Shabbat in the home. This is a home, this is a domestic holiday, for sure. That changed from a pilgrimage festival that you would go to Jerusalem to celebrate this in your homes. So, Dibru, verse 3. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael. This is speaking to the whole community of Israel. So, in verse 1, it's a top-down. This is what God says to Moses and Aaron to tell the Israelites within the narrative. Shifting seamlessly to, hey, this is what we do. And this is how we do it. Now, I want you to hear how different what they did is from what we do. Be'esor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month, it doesn't even mark the month, Yikhu lahem ish se lebet avo se labait. Each, now it says, household gets a small lamb. That could be goat, it could be a lamb, se is both. But each one is supposed to have a lamb. This is their personal kind of ritual. Ve'im yim'at habayit mehiyot miseh, if they're too small to have their own lamb. Now I'm on verse 4. Ve'lakach hu ushcheno hakarov el beito b'michsat nefashot ish lefi ochlo tichosu al haseh. Let him share one with a neighbor who dwells in proportion to the people. Everybody could come together to form a household. I absolutely love this verse in regards to how we open our homes. Two things about this. In Leviticus, you know we have the same thing about poverty. That if someone can't afford a bull, they can take a lamb. If they can't have a lamb, they take a turtle dove. 2 turtle doves. And if you can't have 2 turtle doves, no, a pigeon. And if it's not a pigeon, it's not matzah, but it's a wafer. That's about poverty. What is this about?
Community.
Right.
What's the word for household in Hebrew?
Bait. House.
Yeah, shalom bayit.
How big is your house?
How many can you accommodate?
How can you accommodate? How many? And if you don't have enough in your house, It breaks my heart, when I hear when people do like a 2-person Seder. Breaks my heart. And some people choose to do it that way. They want to have like a one-on-one. And just think about how the Seder is based on a Greek symposia, which was 8 around the table. You know this? The Greek symposia, we lie to the left. I'm making a little aside here. This is not in this. This is about the Haggadah. We each lay like a symposia around a long kind of triclinium, outdoor kind of place, like in Rome or in Greece. And then each would have their young scholar lying with them spooning, as the young student would ask the question, and then the master would kind of back and forth these questionings. So there's really only room for 8. What the Seder does is take this very kind of intellectual, erotic ritual, certainly in Greek time, highly erotic, and intellectualize it and turn it into a process of liberation. Genius. I still think it should be a little unctuous and fun and dipping and all that, but we turned it into a pediatric, somewhat holiday about the children, because we wanted to make this about our children and parents, and not scholar with their young Alchemides. Very, Acolytes, yeah. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
But that's a different story. And I'll just give you one last for those that are interested. If you look up an afikomen, in Greek, was an all-night party. That was really going from house to house. And so what the rabbis did was change the apikomen to the afikomen. And the afikomen means no more eating. Let's sing, let's pray, let's study. He totally reconstructed it. Yeah. It's a protest against the culture, which we're going to get to in a second.
What's the expression that is the culture of the community, the rules of the community? Minhag. So this is the origin of the minhag, really, with the individuality and the changing of the calendar, and it's minhag of the different communities of Judaism.
Well, so that's interesting, because I would say the verse Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law. That is one principle here.
Mm-hmm.
This is minhag that takes precedence over other, and I would argue, Judith, it's exactly the opposite, because everybody's doing the reason the law is being so clear of this is what you must do is because this isn't what people were doing. And why weren't people in Egypt sacrificing lambs? Anybody? What is the lamb?
It's an Egyptian god, wasn't it?
Correct. Yes, this was a form of God. So to be able to do this culturally, so it's saying, I want you to fly in the face, which is why for me, Chrismica and the kind of Happy Holidays experience, for me, it's like, no, this is what we do. We conserve oil, we publicize that we don't do these things, and at the same time, I sang Christmas carols growing up in high school. So it's not that and I went to my son's performance and I do these things. But it is setting us apart and trying to include us together. Because we're going to read in a second how complicated it is to be a people apart simultaneously, by welcoming in the stranger, by including them in this feast.
But the stranger is the Israeli stranger.
No, not necessarily. We're going to get to that in a moment. I know. That's where we jump. And yes, in other iterations of this, it says explicitly that you cannot have the uncircumcised come into your home on this day. This Pesach is only for
our people. This is our people.
That is one iteration.
So, does this holiday then reinforce the chosen people concept?
Depends how you use it. Depends how you do it. And we know there are Seders and there are Seders. Mm-hmm. There can be a time, the narrative itself is, protect yourself, watch out. We're going to get to the mezuzah and putting on the lintel and the Pesach.
How could it not be chosen when the next sentence about putting the blood on the doorpost,
Right.
And God will pass over those that do.
But who's
and
choosing?
Those that choose.
Who's choosing? It's the person putting the blood that's choosing.
But that's our people, and God is acknowledging that we are a people.
So then I challenge, perhaps, or I'm challenging you, there's somebody who's in this Erev Rav, who's in this mixed multitude, who's asking, where do I go? What do I do? Oh my God, I love, my housekeeper. She lives in my house. She knows the Seder ritual better than my mom, and how to clean out the house and put up the paper. If the storm is coming,
Right.
in or out?
Right.
That's my question, David. In or out?
Well, I think the in is an opt-in. And I think that may very well be, if you may not be a people of Israel, but if you opt in to be a people of Israel, that's fine.
So we're going to see it explicitly. They opt in, but they're still not people of Israel. They're strangers among you. They're ger v'toshav.
Conversion does, though?
So conversion is a later thing that says, okay, you can either choose, but once you choose, you're my people or you're not my people. There's a middle category here.
Yeah, but isn't that what's the start? Isn't this the start of that ability?
Well, let's read, because I believe Leviticus has a more strict in or out. You cannot have the uncircumcised in your midst. Within this Passover Seder, that's one tradition. And I would say that's much on the Sher Bacharbanu, the people apart. But here we're going to read by
this, though. That would be much later.
Not much. And some would say that this source material, that the Levitical is actually the last 7th century before the Common Era, that was trying to crystallize a ritual that separated. Why? Back to this Durkheim's law. If you're trying so hard to say something is one way, it's another. So they're mixed multitudes. I'm just saying there are multiple ways to look at what does it mean to separate.
Would you look at this and say the uncircumcised would not be welcome into your house?
Not in this context, but in another. But in another, yes,
Another
absolutely.
context,
And in the Siddur, yes.
So
Sometimes,
the
the
uncircumcised
prayer.
is not going to be saved. When God
You're not hearing me. Again, one strata would say that. You're either in or out. And if you want to join my people, you must convert that way. But there are plenty, and I would say the majority of the context in Exodus and in Deuteronomy is talking about the Erev Rav as a positive light. There are two sides to our tradition. Rashi is very explicit.
Only two?
Well, right. Fair enough. 4 children. And so I'm saying you could take it both ways. But let's go back to this text because I think it is. Yes?
Rabbi, just a quick question.
Yes?
You mentioned putting paper up.
Cover the cabinets.
Yeah, so there is this Mechirat HaMetz, the selling of your chametz, which technically you can't do day of because you already did. Sure. You already did your Bedikat Chametz, you're searching for Chametz. You're allowed to keep flour in your home for the week as long as you separate it, isolate it to the side, and make a clear designation.
Has it always been that way?
It was a heter from a very early on. Yeah, because they don't want to lose all that grain. If you literally have to, last week my kids have been going crazy for their lunches because I'm like getting less and less. But here, let's go back to this text.
Thank you.
Se tamim zachar ben shana yelachem. The lamb should be without blemish, a yearling male. You can take it from sheep or goats. Vayalachem nishmeret ad arba asa yom lechodesh. You should keep watch over it till the 14th day.
Why might that be?
From the new moon to this.
Why would you need to watch it?
In case someone makes a libation over it, someone does something to it. This is a ritual sacrifice, which is brilliant because what it's moving you from is the cultic worship at the temple to an opportunity to do a home barbecue. This is very different. This is very different than go to your priest, make the pilgrimage, give them money, they will make the offering. This is saying each household do your bar et ku, from the beard to the tail, roasted. And all kol kahal adat Yisrael ben harbaim should do this at twilight. This is moving from, David, a centralized institution with a priesthood to a domestic operation where each household represents, but they all have to do it at the same time.
And this is on the eve of leaving Egypt? So
that the narrative has kind of confused you. Because it started with, this is Moses and Aaron, and it's right after this dialogue, and then it's going to pick up that narrative right after. The Egyptians in verse 33, the people bowed low in homage, verse 27. So the narrative picks right back in, but I think it's extracted. I think this section is trying to say, and this is exactly how it happened. Ben Arbaim, everybody's doing this ritual slaughter. But just now, think about Hanukkah, of putting up those candles and saying, I do this when everybody else does something else. Again, if this, the Babylonian or even Egyptian ritual, was to worship this living goat, could you imagine in India, for example, if you hit a cow by accident in a car, they can pull you over from your car and really be, God forbid. Mm-hmm. But what we do on this is like going to India in the middle of, the Ganges right on the side and being like, hey everybody, barbecue. It's a very powerful, and each home doing it. And then, now this is very I have a different interpretation. You should take some of the blood and put it on 2 doorposts and the lintel, al habatim asher yochlu otam, on the lintel of the houses which they're to eat it. What does it look like? When you look at it in the Charlton Heston movie, what do? What is it supposed to be as a sign? So what does it look like? Just in your imagination, what do? They
paint the outside of the door. But
they paint it. It's almost like give a Zorro or a Jewish like a marker. Let's look closely at what this does.
Doesn't it say it should be really on the inside of the door?
It needs to be on both. On both sides. Shtei hamezuzot. On both posts. And on the lintel that are on all of your houses. So now what is it?
Inside.
Outside and inside.
Where does it say inside?
Well, it's saying the 2 doorposts, al hamezuzot, but it's got to be coated. Not the door.
The surrounding.
Okay.
The door jamb.
You ready for a little conspiracy theories, guys? What's the 10th plague?
Death of the firstborn.
And not just the firstborn males, but children, animals, and all of their stock. What happens before that? Palpable darkness. Then there's locusts. But it all starts with the dam, this blood in the rivers. Mm-hmm. Now, my conspiracy theory, now you can watch one of these Discovery channels on this. We are talking about a cataclysmic methane gas leak that begins in the Nile, that oxidizes the water, that makes it become that algae bloom that turns extremely red during that methane gas. It begins to creep up, that kills the frogs, so they all come out, and then from the frogs dying massively to the lice causes this animal beastly sickness that moves to boils, that ultimately the hail is actually coming from this cataclysm that has changed this microclimate, and the final methane leak is so powerful that anything that is not sealed, it seeps, and so where the firstborn children and the firstborn stock were always on the lowest floor because they had Greg Brady's room. He got the best room in the house.
I also watched in a documentary that it may be connected to the eruption of the volcano in Santorini.
Yes, so the Santorini, and that hailstorm.
And all the aftershocks that affected each.
So you could imagine these. Yes, and so you could imagine that the leak, a methane leak, combined from a cataclysmic earthquake, so that the Santorini that are both fiery and hail could absolutely become this. But I don't want to explain
Assuming
it.
this happened. Assuming there were Jews in Egypt. But we don't need to go
which
there.
I do believe historically has merit. Were they slaves in the way we talk about? But now I'm getting far away. So now let's go back to this now. What is blood medically? What does it do?
Life.
Life. What? It carries oxygen, but what is it? It coagulates and seals.
So you thought this to seal the door?
That's my theory.
Do they have a date for that eruption in Santorini? About when was it?
So they...
And you know, the amazing thing there was that the people in Santorini got out.
Well, because I think they knew it was coming, and the aftershocks were very powerful. So this is that it could really affect all the way there. So now I'm going to get away with my Narishkeit theories, but that blood, why it's so important to seal your house, was because this.
Pestilence.
Yeah, you're really sealing in or out, and this is a moment. And what did the rabbis do? They turned it into a cultural moment. An occultic moment.
But Mike, everything we see later on is blood-oriented, putting blood on the ear, on the finger, the right hand. It's the life force.
Yes.
Aren't you overreading this? Isn't it logical that you put blood... If you're saying, I'm a separate...
Oh, I love that. Finish that statement. Isn't it logical that you put blood...
You're separate people, that you reach for the blood, which is so emblematic of life, and put it on some way to identify yourself as a separate people. What else would you reach? You're not reaching for jam or jelly. This is the most important.
I don't know. Isn't it? Okay, let's ask our students here. Like, isn't it logical that you would put up blood on a door?
This is an event.
I don't know what this has to do with logic anyway.
Right.
The book is not about logic.
This is not a holiday. This is separation, and if you're not separate, you die. So I'm going to reach for the source of what is that protects us, and that's...
I do think there's a logic that says, I'm going to take your idol, I'm going to murder it, I'm going to use it as a symbol of my people, that I took your symbol of life and put it on my door, which is why the mezuzah. But what did we do as the rabbis? See, I think more logic is you have Torah, you have symbolize that Torah in a mezuzah, that's a scroll, and you put that scroll up. That makes more sense to me. The blood...
It can't identify you.
What do you mean?
The Torah can't identify. This identifies you.
The mezuzah doesn't identify your home?
Yes, it does.
Well, we didn't...
And the mezuzah... Yeah.
We don't have a Torah yet.
It's like going into a cul-de-sac, which is going to get us nowhere. You can argue over all of this, but the more intellectual you get, the more you lose the spiritual.
Here we are.
Of the blood. You mean?
I think the blood is the blood, and the story tells the story.
I go back to me, it's more like Abraham and a conversation with God. Because this is part of, in a sense, we're saying to God, we hear you. And then God is responding by saying, I hear you hearing me. Which is kind of like Hineni and Abraham.
You can't deal with beliefs with logic. Not really. Not all of them. Some of them you can, but logic and belief systems are often apart.
So let me just let's re-spiritualize. I have to choose in this moment to do this ritual to represent my place within this people.
Right.
And I take some of this blood and I cover my lintel, and I have to eat, and all the houses where we're going to have it, meaning we do this. And we must eat that flesh the same night. They must eat it roasted with, and then it says, Al tzli esh umatzot al mororim yochluhu. They must do it roasted, unleavened, and bitter herbs. This combination. And I don't want to take us away, but the boiled kid, remember, you're not allowed to boil a kid in its mother's milk. The boiling is very important, that we don't boil, but roast. That's our form on this fire. Must be. Don't eat it raw. Don't do it with water. It must be the whole head, medium, toes over the fire.
So we roast it because we don't want to use water, because water means leavened bread.
Perhaps. I think it's just other cults would boil, would purify. Other cults would also eat meat raw. Other cults would eat blood. We're showing all of these ways that we don't do it, but it's also head to toe. We know this in many cults. They take the liver to analyze what is right and what is wrong. This is very, very ancient.
Bring me the heart.
Pieces, exactly. But that's not how we do this. I love this. You shall not leave any of it over till morning. If any of it is left, you should burn it. What it's telling you is, this is not a holiday that lasts, put it in the fridge, you can have the bar mitzvah cake for months afterwards. No. Balayla hazeh, it's a public outdoor ritual. You can imagine all the barbecues that are happening in each of the households. And then we must eat it, and you can't leave it till morning. And if you do,
you burn it.
Entirely.
I have a theory. Once you burn it, the smell goes out to the entire city. And you're demonstrating the God that they worship.
Yes.
You roast.
Yeah. Oh.
So you protest.
It is a
you act and become the entities of the culture you're surrounded by.
Yes.
I was once in Dakar, Senegal, before Eid, which is the end of Ramadan, where they have a feast and they slaughter goats. And in the street, there were all of these goat markets. And you would go around and you would hear the bleating of goats everywhere. There were allegedly 600,000 Jewish men, at least. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of households. Can you imagine the noise that night of all of those goats and sheep being slaughtered?
And the reason they're so...
You smell it.
Yeah. And you smell the roasting.
Yeah.
Well, you have to accept that if you're going to eat meat, you're going to have to slaughter the animal.
Right.
But
something we don't consider when we go to the market and we get prepackaged.
Right.
But your point that this is not in the temple, but in the home, and shared among families, and you share with others and they share with you, turns it into a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, goats don't have lambs. Goats have kids.
I know, that's what
Sheep have lambs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, lamb cannot be goat.
Right.
It's giving the variety. It's giving optionality.
So you can do either one, a kid or...
At least within this. But now, the irony, you can't have lamb. You're not supposed to eat lamb at all.
Yeah.
Why?
Because we don't want to make too close an association that I'm reliving this ritual. Rabbis, yes, the rabbis distance you from so many of these traditions. Why? Because they don't want you to think you can do this DIY. This is my theory. They don't want DIY Judaism.
So for the whole duration of Passover, you're not supposed to have lamb?
Certainly not for the Seder. No, you can eat lamb. But the Seder can't be represented by this lamb to think that you are doing the barbecue yourself. They don't want you to become a priest. Even though I think in Exodus right here, they're saying DIY. This is how you do it.
So
and the other thing... What?
This is how they did it back then.
Right.
But there was no temple.
This, pre. Although, historically speaking, this context of Exodus, some say this narrative structure is actually post-exilic. Much later. Because they're looking back.
Written much later or actually took place much later?
Written much later. What took place was much before. But listen just how, not confusing, but just how different it is from what we do. This is how you should eat it, verse 11. Kacha tochlu oto. You should have chagurim, which is a belt. You've got to have your fanny pack on. You've got to be ready to go. You've got to have sandals on your feet. Na'alechem b'raglechem. Now, in a biblical context, why is that very important? What do you usually do? What did Moses do when he saw the burning bush? What did the priests do? Would they wear shoes? You take your shoes off. So, Mark, to the spiritual context of this, we have to be doing this hurried, rushed feast of presence and opportunity in the same breath. My narrow straits, my PT, the trauma of having to leave and needing to flee, and also staying present and adamant in my ritual, is the spring festival. Crisis, opportunity, combined in the same moment. I have to be both. Totally prepared to move and change my entire life, and absolutely committed to being here and present for my family and for my community, and celebrate all night long, knowing that I have to be packed and ready to go.
Isn't there a disconnect between being packed and ready to go ASAP and the way my grandparents did a Seder, which started at 5 p.m. and ended at 1 a.m.
At midnight. Yeah, I think we live that irony. I think we must live that irony. It's similar to the irony of Sukkot. You have this temporary structure. You're supposed to know how fragile it is, but then we make these elaborate meals. I mean, if you look at my Seder table, it is not a to-go, hurried, rushed event. And yet, what else is it trying to do spiritually to make you... I mean, I thought about this. Has anybody gone to LACMA? I think it's at LACMA where you have a virtual reality immigrant experience, where you can walk through the deserts with the coyotes. It's supposed to be somewhat powerful to try to put you in that experience. You're having a feast walking through like you're about to be a refugee. You're leaving on this day. How different is that than the you must recline? By the way, are you literally the rabbis? Just to this point, why don't we anymore? You lean to the left. You got a pillow. Do you lie down? No. You're not allowed. The rabbis are so worried you're going to turn it into a Greek orgiastic intellectual symposia. No. You can't do these very things. That's why brisket became so important, because lamb could have been quite something. And your staff in your hand, you've got to eat it bechipazon. You've got to eat it hurriedly.
Are you saying that God is saying that you were going to identify, and everybody unidentified, I'm about to strike down, but you better be prepared to get out because the retribution is coming immediately? Is that why this is written, that eat hurriedly, dress, get your sandals on? Are they saying to the Jews, you just got to get out of here quickly? Is that what this is about?
I think it is a happening. It's a kind of cosmic event that's forcing you to both say, here I am, we've made it, but at any moment I got to leave.
But I got to leave because the Egyptians are going to realize what's happened. And they're going to come after me. Because
Exodus is leaving Egypt.
Right.
Not just having that rebellious moment.
No, it is out. I'm leaving. I'm getting dressed, and I'm going to eat, and I'm going to go.
I remember when I was little, my dad always, he wanted to have dinner with us every night, but he traveled a lot. I always remember when that roller bag, they didn't have roller bags then, but that extra roller was there at the door.
Right.
And he put on an extra T-shirt or something to make sure his suit didn't get I knew, and he's like, I'm here, I'm with you.
You know, the interesting thing about this whole section is from the mythological foundation, the beginning of beginnings, the way it's all compressed in these 15 sentences.
Yes.
Is absolutely incredibly profound. From separating by custom, from the lamb being sacrificed, being present and in the future. It's amazing.
And to your point, that's exactly what it says. I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land, man and beast, and there will be punishments to all the gods of Egypt. You better be ready.
You're ready to go.
Do something bold. Be radical. Get ready for that consequence. Gird yourself. And eat in haste. This is also why you can't leave over any till it's morning. So this is to your ancestors. You talk all night. You can't eat balayla hahu. You can't eat. Some people are like, oh my God, we didn't eat till midnight. Yeah. But you're also not allowed to do it all morning. It's not a luxurious moment. Hurry up and invest. Like, hurry up and take your time. Hurry up and get deep. It's a radical push-pull.
Yeah, and it says eat matzah and maror, and bitter herbs, so that both things are there. But my question is, okay, the Israelites were afraid of, they got to leave before the Egyptians found out and they were going to kill them. But someplace later, it says the Egyptians gave them gold.
Right in this narrative. Yes.
Yeah, so I don't, those things seem contradictory to me.
Yeah. Some say that was one of the miracles.
That they gave him gold.
Right. And they thought Moses was a genius.
Right.
They borrowed it,
Right.
in air quotes.
And then we used that gold to make the temple, to make the Mishkan.
You brought up kind of historical things about the methane gas.
Yeah. Well, that's a
We talk about
cockamamie.
all the historical things that everything, the myth or the Torah was based on. So you're saying that these things could have happened, and they created the symbolism to write it down and define it, not based on the historical record, but
The mythic, capital M, which always has pieces of history to it.
Yeah. The Reconstructionist Haggadah, the second or third page says, did it really happen? And really answers it and says it doesn't make any difference. It's the principles and the morals that come out of it that is the most important thing. Whether it was true or not is irrelevant. I mean, that's one point of view, clearly.
So back to the beginning.
Don't
This
ever
is
ask that question at an Orthodox Seder.
Yeah, well,
what God said to Moses and Aaron happening. Did it happen? Oh, it's happening. Oh, it's on.
Something had to happen.
It's on. It's on right now. It's on in every family. It's on just for us all so focused. If I didn't talk about the Passover tonight, and this is why the Torah portion this week is this story. So, this day, now, Vayah hayom hazeh, and this day, now I'm on verse 14, chapter 12, and so, on this day for you will be a memory, and you shall celebrate it a festival to God for all generations, forever and ever, chukat olam.
That means now.
Throughout the ages. Now going back to that first context, this is a different strain.
Yeah. This was not written contemporaneously.
It's all part of one tapestry, but I see a very different flow here. This is a chag, and a chag is a different thing than what this home ritual is designated.
What is a hag? What is that?
Festival.
Oh, okay.
And this is the festival. This is to your ki is closed. Because we have both. The sanctuary should be a place where we have all who come. And there is a community Seder, and we do a women's Seder, and God will, see, it's also Easter Saturday next year too, so I don't know this community well enough. I do think we are mandated to have a community Seder from this. For every generation, this is forever and ever, which means, you know what, frankly, you're seeing right now, every generation does it differently. That's why you have to say, this is how we do it, we've always done it this way, and it'll always be this way. Meaning, it wasn't always this way, we do it differently. And they were doing it, with the Paschal Lamb was the major, the minor was the matzah. Now, 15. Shivat yamim matzot tochelu. 7 days of matzah you should eat. Bayom harishon tashbitu sa'or. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. Remove leaven from your houses. Whoever eats leaven from the first to the seventh, that person is cut off from Israel. Very different strain. This is a negative prohibition. It moves from the Paschal Lamb being the major issue to fluffy and matzah. Matzot originally are, basically tortilla. They're easily to make. They're quick. You can get them out so that when more people are coming, it's easier to make. But now this is actually the ritual. You got to clear it out. Do not eat leaven, sourdough. This was easy in San Francisco, that sourdough starter. Get the starter out. There's a negative prohibition, but then you must positively eat matzot. And this is, yes?
Does this indicate to you that the author, the narrative, is being written in this 14 later, saying this event took place years ago, and we're going to commemorate this event? It's not going to be, you're not going to eat in 7 seconds and get out of the house. Now you really have to look back and think about what this means, and you're going to take 7 days and you're going to celebrate what this was.
Right. And instead of going, instead of
now
being...
we want you to think. We want you to sit back and think about this event.
And then moving from the Paschal Lamb, the Egyptian metaphors, the passing over, and the plagues, we're moving it back to the agriculture, where we're clearing out our leaven, we're spiritually de-souffling. I am trying to see what I am out without all of my puff and my fluff. And for 7 days, you've got to remove this leaven from your houses. And also, too, communally, this one is not saying, come, you want to sit? You make a choice. This is another, you're either in or you're out. If you don't not eat leaven, meaning a negative prohibition of leaven, you can't be part of this. However, positively for the Jew, they have to eat matzah. You can't just not eat matzah. Similar argument to being a vegetarian and kosher. They say, no, you're not kosher, Micah, when I was a vegetarian. Because you don't separate milk and meat. You just don't eat either.
There has to be an active.
So, right. So then those that are witnessing, and this is true of my housekeeper. My housekeeper knew when I was growing up, she didn't bring in her, tamale or anything. She wouldn't bring in any of her food in our house. She knew. She didn't positively eat matzah. That's how you know that someone, a stranger within your midst, is aware of your culture and aware of your tradition. Just like your guest, your non-Jewish guest, is going to show up, maybe with an Easter egg at your plate, reference to Steve Carr Rubin, a beautiful thing. But they're not showing up with fluffy dough. Oh, I got you, a fruitcake.
But there's two very different things here.
Yes?
The one thing is the eating of unleavened bread. And then removing it from your house is a whole other type of activity, an emotional thing.
They're complementary.
Purification kind of a...
They're complementary. And I would say spiritually, there is freedom from and freedom to. It is not enough simply for me not to drink, eat. I try spiritually to see what I'm like without coffee. Not so easy.
Not pleasant.
But then with that, what is the positive actions that I am taking? What are the healthy moves? This is why these diets that you just drink paprika and lemon water, it's meshuggah to me. If you don't also do these positive things of incantations, of spiritual reflection. It's not a resouffle, it's a desouffle and a moving forward. But I just want to say really clearly, on this day I brought you out of Egypt, observe the feast et hamatzot. This is now not called Pesach, it's called et hamatzot. You should observe the unleavened bread day. Do you see how radical this is just when we're reading this?
It's already switched.
It's already switched. Yes?
We generally celebrate the first and second day of Passover. Is that prescribed anywhere?
No, first
Later on. A whole second day Yontif is a whole long Mishigas. Rosh Hashanah, yes.
Yes.
Apart from that, 2 days. But the other...
Now what about the last day of Passover?
Day 8.
It's right here.
Yeah, I'll give you a great Kaplan quote. Do you know what the Kaplan quote is on this? He says, second day of Yontif's like wiping yourself off with a wet towel. That was his opinion. But I love that. So, but just listen to what the new explanation is. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. That's the rationale. You're eating it because I brought you out of the land. What was it just a page ago? I struck down every firstborn in Egypt, and I killed their gods. Radically different. I think radically different. Two sides of the same story. One is the punishment meted out. The other is the liberation story, the freedom that we're leaving to. In the first month, the 14th day of the month, at evening, this is why you didn't eat till like almost midnight. And then until the 21st day of the month at evening. Do you see how they're repeating it now? I'm on verse 18. They're trying to turn this into a 7-day festival. The first story that we had just a few verses ago was about a sunset slaughter, a midnight feast, don't last till morning. And this is saying, no, it's Coachella. It's not just a concert, it's going to be a whole weekend. It's going to be 7 days. In fact, it's going to be from the 14th till the 21st day of the month at evening. How clear is it? That's why that 8th day of Passover is so mashugi. That extra day. I struggle with this every year. Even in Israel, the more traditional Americans who live in diaspora, who live in Israel, they're supposed to keep the diasporic 8th day. Mm-hmm. Everybody else is celebrating and finally eating back to the fluffy, and you're like, one more day. Listen how beautiful this is, though. Let's finish here.
Which verse?
19. So no leaven should be found in your houses for 7 days. Whoever eats what is leavened, that person is cut off community of Israel. David, listen. Whether he's a stranger or a citizen. Which means you can be a non-Jew or a non-Israelite and part of this community, just don't eat the fluff.
But it says country, it doesn't say
Haaretz, Ezrach Haaretz, is country is already a nationalist nomer. Haaretz is, for me, field, area, field.
So it's not Egypt?
No. I think this is where it's in Babylonia, in diaspora, wherever they may be. And even maybe Eretz Israel itself.
Mike,
yes.
What do you think the word stranger really means here? Is it the non-Jew? Is it?
Yes.
It's sort of interesting when you look at this. Normally we separate ourselves. Here we're incorporating the stranger, and we're saying to the stranger, do what we want of you, and you'll be in our community.
Right. I mean, what a powerful political spiritual metaphor.
Right.
To the those
community. You're
right.
a member of the community here if you do what we want you to do. Whether you're circumcised or
not. There's a middle ground here, which is just don't do these things and you can be included in our thing. I'm not telling you must eat the matzah. I think it's a very you shall be cut off on verse 15 it says. You'll be cut off if you do these things. Right. But as a Jew, as an Israelite, I must eat the matzah.
They never mention women.
But again, who is this?
People. I think it's very yes.
Circumcision is the measure.
But I would say the matzot and the baking, it's very important. In all your settlements, b'chol moshvotechem tochlu matzot. You can't just go green. You have to eat this matzah. And it's a symbol of both rushed and hurriedness and also feast. It is a desouffle spiritually, but it's also this reminds us of the Passover, the lamb and the maror that we ate. Just that it's the Jewish Madeleine, quoting Proust, that if you can have one element of it, it brings you all the way back, and not transubstantiation. Truly to that experience of Egypt.